Hey folks!
Hey allihopa!
Welcome to another video.
Today we are wrapping up and hauling what we did in August.
Yeah.
That took a while.
Bit of a shorter...
Yes, this is my least amount of read books this year.
Yeah, I think I beat out my March record by one book, so it's not my least month, but still pretty low. But we got a lot of books to make up for it.
So the first book I listened to was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is about, so she was assaulted by Brock Turner? Is that his name? Anyway, and no one knew who she was until quite recently, and she wrote a memoir about like her experience being assaulted and like the process of the court and kind of what happens afterwards and stuff. It's really good. I gave this 5 stars. She also narrates the book herself, which is always really good. Yeah, I don't really know what to say. It's good. You should read it.
Like an important subject too.
Yeah, really important. First of all, just being assaulted is like awful, but then just the process of being in court and how like long it takes and how that like impacts your entire life was just really interesting to listen to and just like heartbreaking, but it also has like a lot of hopeful bits to it as well. Like her family is very supportive and find out who she is and like what she wants to do and like how to process all of this. Read it.
The first book I read was Stone Fruit by Rebecca Perry. This came in one of my poetry book box. I was kind of excited about this because it talks a lot about, in the back, talks about like chronic pain and growing up, and I didn't really feel that. The poetry was fine, but a lot of the poetry was about her as a young trampoline gymnast, which is fine, but not at all what I was expecting. And like, I didn't really connect with it. Really? I was just kind of like, oh, okay, you were good at trampolining and then you stopped. A life lived. So it wasn't really for me. I didn't get that much out of it. But, you know, maybe one of her other collections is better, or maybe I'll connect to it more. It didn't have anything that was like, huh, that's really cool and interesting, or it's made me think about something in a particular way. This is more just like your life.
The next book I finished was Dune by Frank Herbert. This is about a family who moves from one planet to another planet that's full of, I was about to say dust, but deserts, and political intrigue and kind of magic and drugs. I liked the first, like, let's say 25%, and then it kind of just dragged a little bit. And there was just a lot of, like, names, and sometimes I got confused a little bit, like, who was what, and, like, who died and who didn't die, and yeah, it's just a little bit confusing. And then it, like, has a time jump, but the time jump is, like, not very clear when you start that chapter. It's like suddenly it's like 5 years later, and I was like, what? There was like no telling, like what? Yeah, and then it ended quite abruptly. Like there was like things happen at the end that was like, you know, this feels like the conclusion, but then the chapter just like shh, and that was it. And I was like, okay, like I think it's probably because the book was this long and his editor was like, you need to cut it down because the next book in the series is like super short.
Oh.
So I'm thinking maybe they were supposed to be one book, but then his editor was like, Frank, you gotta you gotta edit it out. I don't know, like I mainly read this because the movie is coming out later this year, which I'm quite excited for. I think the movie will probably be quite good, but I a little bit like, why is this a classic is how I feel. Like, I get it, this is supposed to be like the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi, but like that's
well, it's kind of its time, isn't it? It was like relevant and was was talking about issues that people cared about when it was written in like the 60s. So yeah, like drugs. People were concerned about drugs. People are still concerned about drugs, but like
Not as much.
it was like a new thing that people were super concerned about.
Yeah.
So I guess that's relevant then, and we've kind of maybe grown out of it.
Yeah.
Up.
I think like, I mean, obviously I haven't seen the movie, so I can't say, but I feel like there are things in this book that like, if you have a good screenwriter, you can definitely make a really good story out of this. But there's just a lot of like politics as well that wasn't really super interesting. I mean, I love the sandworms. That was like interesting and stuff. So there's like a lot of things in this book that I feel like if this was written today, it would be probably a little bit better, a little bit more like things were gonna happen and stuff. But like, I kind of want to read the next 2 books in the series and see what happens. I'm not like running to like get there, but like it would be interesting. And I think this one and the next one, Dune Messiah, is like what they're based the movie on. That's at least what the sticker on the new edition say. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad I've read it, so now I can sort of be like, I've actually read like a classic sci-fi book.
The next book I read was Brilliant Corners by Nuzhat Bukhari. This is another book that I got from the poetry box. And again, I was a little disappointed. I was intrigued because this is a person who grew up somewhere else and then moved to the UK, so there was like, maybe there's gonna be talk about that. But the person who wrote this is an academic, and you can tell because there's so many big words in this that it makes it almost unreadable. Like, I consider myself to have quite a good vocabulary. There were words in here where I was just like, I kind of get what you mean, but there's simpler words to use it. And also it detracts from the reading because now I'm having to sit there and be like, what does that mean? Do I even care enough to go Google it? Like, no, I don't. So I didn't. And I think that really detracts from it because some of the poems were quite interesting or talking about interesting things, but it was so wrapped up in academic mumbo jumbo that I found it difficult. And I feel like, I mean, I did a master's degree, so I kind of can navigate mumbo jumbo. But like for someone who maybe didn't, or who isn't accustomed to using that kind of language or reading that kind of language, it would just be difficult, I think. And I don't think that's a worthwhile.
Maybe the author just like used synonyms. Like, what's the synonym for how
Yes.
like Twilight was written, basically using synonyms?
One of my professors at uni actually was like, that's how you should write. You should just write your essay and then like Google synonyms and replace them. And I was like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm not going to do that. And I didn't.
Yeah,
didn't
I mean,
really
for
care,
like
but,
some things you can.
Yeah, but words that mean the same thing
Yeah.
only mean the same thing in specific contexts.
Yes.
And they have other implications and things. And I think that is really something that people forget. They're like, oh, you can interchange them. You cannot. Unfortunately, I didn't like this very much. I did enjoy a few of the poems, but when I read poetry, I don't want to have to also read a dictionary at the same time.
So the next book I read was The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. Sorry, I'm like, I just want to, her name, I just think that it should be something else for some reason.
I feel like Danielle L, it kind of trips you up a little.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is a fantasy romance, kind of like, when I say fantasy, there's no magic in this, I think, if I remember correctly. The main character is like a princess, and she has 11 sisters, and at this dinner, she like murders all of them. This is like the first like page, basically. She poisons all of them, and then as she's the last one standing, she's gonna get married to like their like enemy country, and this country is like they are in charge of like a bridge, hence the Bridge Kingdom. That like is basically super important for like trade and stuff. In my mind, I'm thinking it's like a fancy version of like the bridge between Denmark and Sweden. That's like essentially what it is. Yeah, basically what she's supposed to do is like to get all the information and then write a letter to her dad and be like, this is how you invade this country, because this country is like, they have a lot of secrecy, obviously, because they're in charge of this bridge or whatever, and then things are not as they seem. This was like very silly, but I really enjoyed it. Obviously, enemies to lovers, yes. Audiobooks was quite good as well. They have like some dual chapters, or like so there will be two narrators, which I really enjoy, and like each like chapter had like this like little like sound effect. It reminded me, you know, when, oh, I don't know if you did, but like there was like these tapes that you would listen to, and it was like, when you hear this sound, it's time to turn the page. It kind of like reminded me of that. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and you'll find out later how I thought about the second one.
The next book I read was Homebody by Rupi Kaur. Again, disappointment. I'm sorry. This is why I didn't read so much this month, because I just kind of was reading books and then I was kind of disappointed, and so I was discouraged. But I really liked her first one, Milk and Honey, and I moderately liked her second one, which was called The Sun and Her Flowers. And if you don't know, Rupi Kaur's poetry style is usually very short poems, a little bit like maybe you would consider it Tumblr poetry, kind of that aesthetic. And I liked that in the first one, and I was kind of like, for the second one. And then for this one, it didn't even feel like poetry. It's just sentences. Like, one sentence I don't feel can really be a poem unless it's a really good sentence that's constructed in a really good way and it's poetic. Like, and a lot of times it was just like, this is just a sentence that is a fact. Like, trans women are women. That's just a sentence, that's not a poem. So, and it kind of felt like maybe she had like a contract to write a third book and she didn't really know what to do, and she was just kind of like, well, I'll just write down all of the random thoughts that I have during the day. And that's fine, but I didn't care. There's just a lot, like, our elders are not disposable. That's a whole page. That's one poem. That's not a poem. It's just one sentence. She didn't even break it up into multiple lines. I found that really difficult. It does have some like discussion about sexual assault, which is interesting and should be discussed, but I just felt like it was couched in so much
fluff.
Yeah, like I was gonna say maybe blubber, you know, like on a seal, like all the fat around, and like
it's hard to penetrate.
Actual meat. Yeah, yeah. I read this and then I kind of stopped reading for like the rest of the month, basically. I have read a few more, but like I kind of read this and I was like, what am I even doing? What? Yeah, I didn't enjoy this.
Sorry.
Maybe someone else will, but I was not the target audience for this. I don't even know who the target audience for this would be.
Her fans?
Maybe. But I will also say that I was like, oh, maybe when she reads her poems, it's better. And it was worse. It was like secondhand embarrassment. I hated it.
The next book I read was The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is the fourth book in the Truly Devious series, and this is kind of like a standalone. I mean, you maybe have to read the previous books, but it's like a complete new mystery. It has nothing to do with the previous one. So Stevie, who's the main character, she and two of her friends, they basically get invited to this like summer camp location to uncover this murder that happened in the 70s. And it's kind of like the way that the murder is kind of feels like a horror movie, but it's not like scary in any way. It's just like a crime, and she's trying to figure out who did it. I'm stupid, so I can never figure out who the murderer is. And I love watching crime, and I'm always like, oh, it's this person. I didn't know. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. And with this one, I did not figure it out either.
I'm laughing, but I'm the same way. I just don't want to try to guess. I just want the story to wash over me, and then at the end I'm like, yeah, I don't want to have to that's not why I'm reading or watching these. Yeah,
it's like nice, like, because with this one I felt like you can sort of go back and like see the clues, and I was like, oh, okay, that's perfectly fine for me. And I don't necessarily need to figure it out before the big reveal. It's not important to me.
Yeah.
But I like this. I gave it like 4 stars. Like, I'm a sucker for these books. They're really good. They're really like fast reads for me. Like, I go through them really quickly, and I'm always just like, literally could not put them down. They were so good. I didn't think the third one was as good, but like, I really enjoy these. So if you want like a nice little like soft crime mystery book, I would recommend this series. It's quite good.
The next book I read was La Mare au Diable by Georges Sand, who is a woman. I know her name is George, but it's a woman. That was just her pseudonym. This book is came out kind of in the same century as like Pride and Prejudice, and I was also thinking, I've read a lot of books by men who are French. I want to read some female authors, so I googled French female authors, and she came up. And I must say, this book was also kind of weird. This book is about poor people in the countryside, but written by a rich person. And also, this rich person happens to think they know a lot about how people should live their lives. So it's a little moralistic, and it's also kind of like, if only us city people could be as stupid as those people out in the countryside, and then we would be happy like them. And it's kind of like, that's not a nice way to go about that. You can be maybe less paternalistic about it. But like, the story is about this man who is a widower, and his father-in-law is like, you have children and you can't take care of them, you need to find a wife. So what I have done is I have spoken with a friend of mine whose daughter is also a widow, and you can go to her house and you can get married and come back. And this guy, who has no backbone, is kind of like, okay, if you say so. To be fair, he lives with his father-in-law. His father-in-law like owns the land that he works on. He doesn't have any of his own property, so like he can't really say no, but he goes. And their neighbor is also like, my daughter, who is 16, has just been hired as a shepherdess for this guy near to where your future wife is living. So can you bring her with you? And in the 2 days that it takes for them to get there, they fall in love somehow. He is 28, by the way. So he like gets there and he meets the widow, and he decides he doesn't like her, and then the shepherdess decides to not work there because the guy she's going to work for is a rapist. So they both come back, and then they get married, and that's the end of the book. But the way that the marriage is written, like, the story is happening, and then it gets to the end, and they haven't gotten married yet. And then in an appendix, always a bad sign, the appendix is like an ethnographic study of what weddings are like in like 19th century France, except it's their wedding. But it's fictional, but it's like an ethnographic study, and there's like several weeks of run up for the wedding where there's like mock fights between the families. It's all really weird. But the story itself before the appendix was fine. There's like 4 or 5 chapters where she goes on about like, oh, if only we were as stupid as those simple country people. I just didn't think it was very good. It was kind of a disappointment because I was like, I had never studied any female authors in school in all of my French schooling. So I was like, I should read some to balance it out. And I googled which is her best novel. And people were like, this is her best novel. So I got
So don't read the other ones.
Well, that's my problem now. It's like, do I read another one by her in the hope that it's better and that somehow everyone else was wrong? Or do I give up on her completely and read someone else?
The next book I read was The Traitor Queen by Danielle L. Jensen, the second book in the Rich Kingdom. This follows kind of like directly the events happening in the first one. I'm not gonna, I mean, you can guess from the title maybe what happens. But I like this one a little bit more because it was like the plot progressed with the characters, kind of like as in the first one, she kind of just runs around trying to figure out like all the secrets. Whereas in this one, it's like they're on a journey, which is like a little bit more interesting to read. The ending was a little bit like, and then it was all done, and I was like, okay. Like, I would have liked an epilogue maybe. So yeah, that was like my main issue with the book, that it was kind of like abrupt in that. And then it was like a lot of back and forth between the characters, like, oh, like, you lied. Oh no, but I didn't. But you lied. And I was just like, you need to talk, have a conversation. But overall, I enjoyed this a little bit more than the first one. Looking forward to the other books in the series, which will feature other characters in this world. Also a nice audiobook as well with two. This was more every other chapter was either the guy or the woman.
The next book I read was The Penguin Book of Irish Verse, introduced and edited by Brendan Kennelly. Again, kind of disappointed. This was written kind of during the Troubles, or it was edited and collated during the Troubles in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And you can kind of tell there's like, it's divided into 3 sections. So the first section is like poems that were written in Irish and translated into English. And then the second section is like almost exactly to the exact date of like pre the Irish Revolution. And then the following, like the third section is the Troubles and stuff. Kind of. That's not exactly accurate with the exact history, but yeah, it's like the period once the war happened. It was fine. There's a lot of the poems that were originally in Irish were just lists of people's names or names of places, which I didn't find very interesting. And we did have a conversation about how like that is a form of poetry. It's just not a form of poetry that I enjoy. It's like they were being paid to name drop or something. And I didn't know who any of these people were, so it wasn't interesting to me. There's also one of the translators for this, and I actually thought it was an introduction by Brendan Kennelly, but I believe it was an introduction by the person who translated the poem. But he said that the way that the Irish were treated in Ireland by the English was worse than how Black people were treated in America during slavery. And I was like, you need to chill. They were treated poorly in Ireland. However, you can't compare the two. They maybe were treated poorly, but it wasn't the same thing. And I know people will probably yell at me about that, but it's true. It wasn't the same thing, and you can't say that it was the same thing. So that kind of angered me. The rest was okay. There's a lot of kind of long poems that I didn't care about. And then there were a few poems that I did, like a few authors that I knew, that I liked, that were there. They didn't include poems that I liked, that I knew from those people. And the poems, if this had been my introduction to those people, I would not have liked them, which is a little bit of a shame. Also, there's only 5 women in this, and that's kind of a disappointment. But yeah, it was kind of just medium. It was medium.
And the next book I read was The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This is about Evik, and she lives in this tiny little village. They have like magic, but only the girls have magic. Wolf girls. But she doesn't have any magic, so she's like an outcast because her mom like had her with some guy that wasn't part of the village or something. The woodsmen, every few years they come to her village and take one of the girls to the king for some reason. This year they choose another girl because they want a seer, but the village doesn't want to give that girl because they only have 2, and like that's not very nice because they've not born very often. Anyway, so they pretend that Evik is this girl and she's taken, and then things happen, and the woodsman that come and get her is like the outcast prince of the king. Kind of, he's like the true heir of the throne, but he's not the favorite of the king. And then they go on a mission to like find a magical bird to give to the king so he can have some powers. I enjoyed it. It was very lyrical, so it took me a while to get through this book. But like, it wasn't bad. It was just like, after reading all these ridiculous novels, this is like, oh, a slap in the face. But I really enjoyed it. I like the discussion of like the creation of like a country in a way, like how you just take land and then you throw out and like segregate people. And then like Evie, who is from two different cultures, like she's a wolf girl, and then her dad, who she meets, is like Jewish. I don't know if they call them Jewish in this book, but that was like the implication. And how she kind of like tried to be part of both worlds, but she's not really, and then she wants to, and like that kind of, those feelings were really interesting to read about. I think you should read it. It was like a nice little like fairy tale for adults kind of vibe, and it's a lot of like the mythology is like very present as well. I will definitely read other books by this author. It's just like a standalone as well, which is always nice. Kind of the ending was a little like too loose for me. I wanted like a little bit more stuff to happen, but overall it was like a really enjoyable book, and I would recommend it to people.
The last book I read was La Piranha by Lucie de la Rue Marandru, another book in French by another female author. Side note, which I thought was very interesting, was that the English language Wikipedia page for her quite extensively talks about her lesbianism. The French page does not at all mention it, even though it's much longer. She was married to a man, but she wrote extensively about lesbianism and also seems to have been a lesbian. She had a lot of relationships with women. This book did not talk about lesbianism at all.
No.
Well, basically, not a lot of her novels were available online. Only 2 of them, and I could only find one of them in audiobook, and I was really struggling, so I was like, I need to listen to an audiobook rather than read it, because I just can't. So this is the story of a woman who's married to a man whose last name is Piron, and Piranha in French is a piranha. So because she's the wife, she's called La Piranha by a lot of people. And she basically, it doesn't have like good morals, and she has an affair with a man, and then she kind of falls out of love with this man from the affair, and her husband hires like a new young guy to work on his boat, and she falls in love with him, and her husband like gets suspicious, so she kind of engineers the situation so that the first lover kills the husband, and that's what happens. That's the whole book. And then like she kind of gets hounded out of the town and lives in Paris at the end. I wasn't really sure what the point of the story was, because it wasn't even really that moralistic. It wasn't like this is a bad thing for her to have done, she's a bad person. It was just kind of like, she did this, and then now she owns a pub in Paris. And I was kind of like, okay, yeah. And the guy, the murderer, he was like sent off to work for perpetuity. I don't remember what it's called, like hard labor, and he dies on the way. But he never reveals that she pushed him to murder her husband, and the husband's dead, obviously. And then the child, he's not a child, he's like 20, but she's a little older than him, so it's kind of creepy. But and that boy, he like runs away from home basically because he has like figured out that she got the other guy to murder her husband so that she could be with him, and he loved her, but also he thinks it's kind of weird and creepy, so he runs away, and they don't meet up again. But it's unclear what happens to him at the end. It was kind of interesting. It was pretty short, which I liked, which meant that I could read it in one day. Yeah, I just wasn't sure what the point was, and I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't about lesbians, because the English language Wikipedia page sold me so much. She was a little later than George Sand. Like, this book came out in 1931. It was interesting, just kind of wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe I'll try to read some of her lesbian stuff, if I can find it.
The final book I read was Witch Shadow by Susan Dennard. This is the 4th book in the series. But then there's like a novella. Anyway, I enjoyed this. However, there's a lot of stuff now that is happening in this world that I'm just like, I'm very confused. At least Susan Dennard has a recap of all the books on her website, which is really good, but it still made me very confused. There's just like a lot of, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but there's like a lot of like previous, like people are reborn into people, and then they have different roles, and I'm just like, oh god, what's happening. There's like one character, I don't want to say who, but there's a character who's like possessed by another life. This is all very confusing. And I did not like that at all. Because it was like, it kind of completely disregarded a lot of stuff that happened in the previous book. And it's like, you kind of like set back this character a little bit. But overall, it's a good world and it's like very interesting to read about. There's like a lot of stuff happening at all times. I think it's like a little weaker than at least the previous book. And I don't want to like say what happens in this book because if you haven't read it. But like the main premise is like, there's two girls, Isolde and Safi. They're thread sisters. One has the truth magic. She can tell when people are lying. Isolde can like see people's threads, which is essentially their feelings. And then things happen. Things happen. They're like haunted by a blood witch who can smell people's scents. He's very strong. Well, he can like basically follow you for like miles.
I'm just like, it sounds like a bloodhound.
But basically, yeah, he's basically like a bloodhound. But he's also like incredibly strong and he heals from like every wound.
Oh.
There's like a lot of political intrigue that happens and so on and so forth. I would recommend reading this series. It's really good. I did give this 4 stars, but I'm also very confused about this book. I think the next book will be the last book in the series, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
That's it. That's all of the books that we read. And now we can talk about our haul.
Yes. If lighting has changed, it's because we had to stop filming.
Yes. The first book that I got is Selected Poetry and Prose by Charlotte Mew. I got this from Gaze the Word, which is an excellent bookstore that you should check out if you're in London. I have already read a few poems by her, and I've liked all of the ones that I have seen so far. So I'm excited. Hopefully it'll be good. But I haven't really done more than flick through it.
So the first book I got this month was 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This was in the Fairy Loot box for August, July. It's all vague. This is like based on mythology, fairy tale. I mean, the cover is beautiful, obviously. It has sprayed edges. Is there art? There is art. Art. And there's art. Art everywhere. Quite excited to read this. I haven't heard too much about it. A beautiful book cover must mean a great story, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100% guaranteed.
I mean, it says dazzling and magic on the cover blurb. Don't really know what this is about, but maybe that's for the better. Just going in, not knowing.
I got poems by Radcliffe Hall. Radcliffe Hall is famous for having written The Well of Loneliness, which was like a lesbian novel of the beginning of the 20th century.
I think based on the life.
Based on their life and other people they knew.
Yeah.
And it's also famous for having been part of like an obscenity trial also. But I remember seeing that someone who was sent to one of the Nazi death camps who survived said that she had read the novel before she was sent there and that it was really comforting to know that there were people like her out there and that like helped her. I don't know if that's true, but that is something that I've read somewhere. Anyway, I haven't actually read The Well of Loneliness yet, but I saw this and I thought I should snatch it up since I like poetry. And queer history is always good.
Speaking of queer history, I got this one, Bisexual Politics, Theories, Queries, and Visions, edited by Naomi Tucker. This is like, I think from the 90s. I watched a video by a YouTuber. I will put a name here and link in the description about like different books about bisexuality and mentioned this one. This was quite expensive secondhand, by the way. You can read it online, I think. I'll link in the description. I am a sucker to have like things physically, and you know, I feel like this is a book that I want to like underline and you know make notes in. I am worried that it's going to be a bit transphobic because I feel like
The 90s.
old like queer theory, it was not like great in that sense, but like hopefully it will be interesting to just read history of bisexual people and stuff like that.
I got Staying Alive, Real Poems for Unreal Times, edited by Neil Astley. This is published by Blood Axe, who publish a lot of really cool poetry collections and things. I believe, I don't remember when this came out actually. 2002, which is kind of scary considering that like I saw this title and I was like, is this a book about the period that we're in? It's not. But I keep seeing this and its sequels. I keep seeing them floating around. I think one of them came out recently, so I thought I might as well start with the first one and see how I go. The next one is Being Alive and then Being Human. It seems exciting.
The next two books I got from a local charity shop was The Master and Margarita and Slaughterhouse 5. I mean, classics to read. This is short, which is always good. And I've heard that this is quite good as well. It's like a sci-fi anti-war book. And this is like about
Satire.
yes, satire of, I don't know, words. About like Russia and living there under the USSR, I think. But yeah, it sounds pretty fun. Also, it came with someone left this in.
I love finding postcards. Yes. I found like photographs used as bookmarks in books from things before, and I always feel kind of bad that they've lost that photograph.
Yes.
It's also kind of a cool...
Yes, I watched a video of Jack Edwards, is that his name? Where he bought a secondhand book and someone had left their like passwords in the back of the book. No. But yeah, so I'm excited to read both these.
The next books I all got together. Was it an Oxfam? It was an Oxfam in Bloomsbury. So I got The Poetry of War, 1914 to 1989. I think it's kind of US focused, but I don't quote me on that because I haven't actually read it. It seemed kind of interesting. I don't know if it stops at 1989 because that's when it was published, or if it decided to just stop there because I guess wars nowadays, there's so many of them that we don't care.
Well, once the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah, well, it was published in 1990, so I'll give it a pass there. It's also edited by Simon Fuller, who I know has done other things that I've seen peripherally. I don't remember what he has done, but his name is ringing bells in my head. So, yes. I also got Poets of World War II, which I know is US focused because it's an American poets project. I don't know that much about World War II poets. I'm mostly familiar with World War I poets, so this will be kind of interesting. And then I also got 3 more. I got God is an Onion, a selection of poems by Rosemary May Wells, just because the title tickled me. I don't know if people get spontaneous, fully formed thoughts sometimes, but I have previously had the thought that the world is an onion. Doesn't mean anything, don't know, I just woke up and I was like, the world is an onion. So I was just like, huh, yeah, other people clearly think the same as me, but I don't know anything about her. Her name also rings bells, but who knows?
Who knows?
Then Minute by Glass Minute by Anne Stevenson. I have read a few poems by her, and I liked them, so I thought, why not just get this, because it was very cheap. And then the last one is Poems for and about Edward Thomas, who was an early 20th century poet as well. I have read some of his prose and poetry before, so it kind of be interesting to see what other people thought about him.
The next 2 books I got, I Gazed the Word. The Heart's Invisible Furies by Jon Boyne, and Dual Attraction, Understanding Bisexuality, edited by 3 people. Weinberg, Williams, and Pryor. This one I've actually wanted to read for a while. This was in their secondhand section. So I thought, why not get the hardcover copy? This is like an historical fiction set in Ireland. And then this one I have never heard about, but this was in their bisexuality section, but like secondhand. So I thought, why not get it? I have now 2 books on like bisexuality, history. I have no idea if it's any good. So what?
We'll see.
We'll see. I thought, you can read like a chapter, and because I think each chapter is by a different person. Thank you, Gazed the Word.
I also got selected poems by Louis MacNeice. I really like his poetry. He gives off a vibe that I'm into. I'm vibing with him. He was also featured in the Penguin Irish Poetry book, so I didn't know he was Irish, but now I do. And I also had happened to already buy this book by the time I got to him in the book, so I'm excited to see some of the other stuff that he's written, because I have liked a lot of the stuff that I have seen. He seems like a kind of soft boy, and I like that.
The next book I got was also at the Oxfam at Swim, Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill. This is also an historical fiction set in Ireland, also queer, I think. Ireland! Who knew? It's a theme. But yeah, I don't really know that much. I've seen this multiple times. I read the blurb multiple times. And it, queer. I have a superpower where I can just look at spines in books and know if it's queer. It's not as strong now. It used to be really strong when I used to work in a bookshop. I would just know what was queer. Excited. It's a thick boy, but I'm sure it's great.
I then got 3 books together. Œuvres complètes by Arthur Rimbaud, Les Fleurs du Mal by Baudelaire, and then Paroles by Jacques Prévert. These are all French poets who I studied at school, and I really liked them. In fact, I learned a poem at the age of 12 by this guy, and I still remember most of it, which is crazy because I don't remember most of my other stuff that I learned at school. But I do remember this fucking poem. And I also really liked Rimbaud. He was also queer. He had a kind of a weird tragic history where he fell in love with a different poet, Paul Verlaine, but then he left Paris or France completely, and he stopped writing poetry at a very young age, 23 or something, and then he became an arms dealer and then died from tuberculosis or something. Wow. So he wrote a lot. He was very prolific, but he stopped very early. And then Baudelaire is very famous. I think I have read some of his stuff, but I don't remember that much. But anyway, these are the cheap paperbacks that are really common in France. So the paper quality is really poor, but they were very cheap. So
the next 2 books that I got at Foyles is Speech Read by Emily Henry, which I have read previously. I really enjoyed it, but I, kind of want the paperback copy, why not? And then I got Rörelsen by John Ajvide Lindqvist. He wrote Let the Right One In, which is a really good book. I have enjoyed all of his short story collections, and I have read Let the Right One In. I haven't read any of his other longer fictions, so I thought I read this. This is part of a loosely tied trilogy, and this is about him, kind of. It's weird. I don't really know, but I'm excited. I really enjoyed that Foyles has a non-translated fiction.
Yes, it's very good. That's also where I got mine.
Yes, I can get some Swedish stuff there, and I don't have to rely on my family to send me stuff. But yeah, I'm excited to read this. It's not as long as his other books. I just like his vibe,
You got a vibe.
Yeah. But yeah, I really recommend, I don't know if any of his short stories are translated, but if they are, I do recommend reading them. They are really, really good. Otherwise, Let the Right One In is so good. You should read it. It's better than Twilight.
You heard it here first, folks.
A vampire story better than Twilight? Unheard of. And also watch the Swedish movie. The English stuff? No.
Trash.
No. The Swedish one is magnificent, and it's also directed by one of my favorite directors, Thomas Alfredson, who directed Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. He's really good.
Keeping with my war stuff, I got collected poems of Siegfried Sassoon. Some viewers may remember that I read his war poetry a few months ago, and I saw this in a charity shop in the Cotswolds. I got it because I wanted to read some of his later stuff. He's kind of one of the rare World War I poets who didn't die during World War I. He died, I think, in the 60s. So he was writing quite a lot of poetry after that as well. So I think it'd be kind of interesting to compare the two, his war poetry and then his later poetry. He was also maybe possibly queer. Certainly Wilfred Owen was in love with him. It's true.
I'm not saying that he wasn't.
Kind kind of fun to read about people who may have been queer.
I agree.
Yeah. I don't think he ever said anything either way. Maybe he was just not homophobic. Who knows?
He
But
didn't
anyway.
know.
Maybe he didn't know. But
He's one of those, like, when you go to the wiki page, you go to, like, personal details.
Personal life every time.
Yes.
Every like author I look at or any person, I'm like,
Yes.
personal life. He seemed pretty chill.
The next book I got was the Castlevania Art of the Animated series. I love this show. It's great. And then I follow one of the creative directors on Twitter, and he was like, oh, retweeting a lot of stuff about this, and I was like, there's an art book? So I immediately hopped on the tube down to Forbidden Planet, and I got it. Yeah, I've only looked at some of it. They have like storyboards, character drawings and stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to look at this some more later. I recommend this. I mean, it's very gory, but if that's okay with you, I recommend the series. It's really good. The first season in particular is really good.
The last book that I got is 101 Poems to Keep You Sane, Emergency Rations for the Seriously Stressed, edited by Daisy Goodwin, who I know nothing about. I just saw this in our local charity shop, and I thought, that sounds kind of funky. Why not? It's pretty short. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It seemed like it had, like, little blurbs about why this poem was, like, important or useful to someone. So I think that might be a kind of cool thing. I like hearing what other people think about stuff.
And the last book I got is The Devil Makes Three by Torre Bolino. This was in the August box for Illumicrate. This is about two people who release a curse, and then they have to stop it.
Fair enough.
And then I guess they fall in love. It sounded very enemies to lovers kind of thing. And this
The cover is beautiful. I'm liking this like water marble.
Yes. There's a little guy here. I'm quite excited to read this. I have never heard about this book before I got it. I mean, it sounds like something I would read.
It does sound like something
yeah, like
you would
enemies
read.
to lovers, a little ridiculous, like fantasy elements. What's not to love? Also, one of the characters is named Tess. It's me! I'm sure I'll read it during the Illumicrate read along.
That's all of the books that we bought, and it was so many.
So many.
Comment down below what you thought about the books that we read and about the books that we bought. It was a lot, so there's a lot to talk about.
Yes. And we are available on Instagram and Twitter. Goodreads, not so much, but we are on there. So why don't you follow us there too?
Yeah.
And yeah, like, subscribe, and all that jazz. We'll see you in the next video.
Yes.
Hej då!
Bye!